Brazil, 1847. The iron spike was still warm when Elias pulled it from the forge. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. Behind the sugar mill, his master lay unconscious, blood pooling from his temple where the shovel had struck. In Elias's other hand, he clutched the same branding iron that had scarred his mother's flesh 15 years ago, the one used in unspeakable violence that still haunted his dreams. Tonight, the plantation would see justice. Tonight, a son would answer for sins that the law refused to acknowledge, and by dawn, the gate at Fazenda Santa Cruz would display a message that would echo through Bahia for generations. If this story gave you goosebumps in the first minute, click the subscribe button now so you don't miss anything here. The Brazilian heat clung to everything like a second skin. Elias wiped sweat from his brow as he hauled another bundle of sugarcane toward the mill, his muscles screaming from 12 hours of labor under the merciless sun. At 28, his body bore the map of bondage, scars across his back, a crooked finger that never healed right, and eyes that had seen too much suffering for one lifetime. Fazenda Santa Cruz stretched across vast acres of Bahia soil, its colonial manor gleaming in the distance like teeth in a predator's mouth. Master Antonio Carvalho owned 143 souls, but he took particular interest in breaking the strong. Elias remembered every detail of that night 15 years ago. He was 13 when he heard his mother's screams coming from the forge where Master Carvalho kept his tools of torture. The branding iron with the SC initials, Santa Cruz, wasn't just for marking cattle. Young Elias had hidden behind the woodpile, paralyzed by terror as his mother's cries pierced the humid night air. He saw everything through the gaps in the wooden slats. Everything. The memory burned hotter than any iron. His mother Rosa never spoke of that night, but her eyes changed. The light that once danced in them when she sang old songs from Africa died completely. She moved through the plantation like a ghost, her spirit shattered into pieces too small to gather. 3 months later, she walked into the Paraguaçu River and didn't come back. They found her body downstream, caught in the mangrove roots. Before we continue, if stories of resilience and justice move you, tap that like button and subscribe. There are voices from history that deserve to be heard, and you'll want to be here for what happens next. Master Carvalho ruled Fazenda Santa Cruz with calculated cruelty. He was a thin man with pale skin that burned easily under the tropical sun, watery blue eyes, and hands that were always clean despite the blood on them. He'd inherited the plantation from his father and expanded it ruthlessly, making his fortune on the backs of enslaved Africans who cut cane from sunrise to sunset. The fazenda sat 10 miles inland from Salvador, surrounded by dense Atlantic forest on 3 sides and the Paraguaçu River on the 4th. The main house was a 2-story structure with blue-painted shutters and a wide veranda where Carvalho took his meals, watching his human property work themselves to death in the fields below. Elias worked the forge now, the same forge where his mother had suffered. Carvalho thought it was fitting, a private joke only the master understood. Every day, Elias heated iron to shape tools, repair equipment, and create the instruments of their own oppression. Every day he saw that branding iron hanging on the wall, the SC letters still visible in the metal. The other enslaved people on Fazenda Santa Cruz knew Elias carried something dangerous inside him. His friend Thomas, who worked the sugar mill, often warned him, "Your eyes give you away, brother. Carvalho will see that rage one day, and it'll be the death of you." But Elias couldn't extinguish what burned inside. Every morning when he woke in the senzala, the slave quarters, cramped with 30 other bodies, sleeping on dirt floors, he made the same silent promise to his mother's memory. Justice would come, not from Portuguese courts that considered enslaved people property, not from priests who blessed the plantation while ignoring the suffering, but from his own hands. The year 1847 was particularly brutal. The sugar harvest demanded inhuman hours. Carvalho had purchased 10 new enslaved people at the Salvador market, separating families without hesitation. One of them was a young woman named Caterina, barely 16, who reminded Elias painfully of his mother. The same gentle spirit, the same quiet dignity despite the chains. Carvalho noticed her too. Elias watched the master's eyes follow Caterina around the plantation. He saw the pattern repeating, the same predatory attention, the same inevitable violence approaching. History was about to repeat itself, and Elias felt 15 years of suppressed rage crystallize into deadly purpose. On the night of August 14th, Carvalho summoned Caterina to the main house after dark. Elias was working late at the forge, repairing a broken cane press, when he saw her walking up the path, trembling. Something inside him snapped with the finality of a chain breaking. He set down his hammer and made a decision that would change everything. Tonight, the cycle would end. Tonight, Master Antonio Carvalho would answer for his crimes in a language he understood, the language of iron and blood. The tools of justice hung all around him in the forge, waiting. What would you do if the law offered no protection? If you witnessed evil repeat itself, would you stand by or take action? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This story is just beginning, and what happens next will shock you. The forge fire cast dancing shadows across the walls as Elias stared at the branding iron hanging on its hook. His heart pounded like the drums he remembered from childhood, before everything was taken away. Outside, the tropical night buzzed with insects, and somewhere in the distance, a howler monkey screamed, a sound that always reminded him of human agony. Caterina hadn't returned from the main house. 2 hours had passed since he'd watched her disappear through the servants' entrance, and the windows of Carvalho's private chambers glowed with lamplight. Elias knew exactly what was happening up there. He'd lived this nightmare before, powerless, and 13, hiding behind woodpiles while his world shattered. Not tonight, not again. Tomas appeared in the forge doorway, his face glistening with sweat from the mill. "Brother, what are you doing still working? Carvalho will beat you for wasting lamp oil." Then he saw Elias's expression, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "No, whatever you're thinking, no. They'll kill you. They'll kill all of us." "He has Caterina up there," Elias said quietly, his voice like stone grinding against stone. Tomas closed his eyes. "I know. But Elias, there are 143 of us who will pay the price for whatever you do tonight. Think of them. Think of the children in the senzala." "I am thinking of them. I'm thinking that if we don't stop this, it never ends. Your daughter is 9 years old, Tomas. In 4 years, maybe 5, Carvalho will look at her the way he looked at my mother, the way he's looking at Caterina right now." The truth of those words hung between them like smoke. Tomas had a daughter named Isabel, bright-eyed and still innocent of the full horror of their situation. But she was growing up, and in this place, growing up meant becoming a target. "What are you planning?" Tomas asked, though his voice suggested he didn't want to know. Elias pulled the branding iron from the wall. The SC letters gleamed in the firelight. "Justice, the kind that Portuguese courts will never give us. You should go back to the senzala. You should be nowhere near here tonight." Tomas stood frozen for a long moment, war playing across his features. Then he stepped fully into the forge and closed the door behind him. "If you're doing this, you'll need someone watching your back, and someone to help carry whatever needs carrying." Elias felt something crack in his chest, gratitude mixed with grief. "If they catch us, then we die together, as men who chose their own path. Better than dying slowly in these fields." Tomas picked up a heavy hammer from the workbench. "Besides, Carvalho killed my brother 2 years ago with that whip. Said he was moving too slow in the heat. He was sick with fever, couldn't even stand straight. I've been carrying that debt too." The 2 men stood in the forge, weapons in hand, understanding passing between them without words. Around them, Brazil slept, an empire built on sugar and suffering, where enslaved people outnumbered free citizens 3 to 1, yet remained powerless before the law. The Código Criminal of 1830 was clear. Enslaved people who killed their masters faced death by hanging, but the law offered no protection when masters committed atrocities against their human property. It was a system designed to perpetuate itself forever. Tonight, Elias and Tomas would throw sand in those gears. They waited until midnight, when even the overseer had finished his rounds and retired to his quarters. The main house stood quiet, except for the light still burning in Carvalho's chambers. Elias and Tomas moved like shadows across the yard, keeping to the darkness between buildings. The main house had been built in the Portuguese colonial style, thick walls designed to stay cool in the heat, heavy wooden doors, iron-barred windows on the ground floor. The Carvalho family consisted only of the master himself. His wife had died in childbirth 5 years ago, and his 2 adult sons managed other properties near Recife. A handful of house slaves lived in quarters attached to the kitchen, but they knew better than to interfere in their master's nocturnal activities. Elias and Tomas entered through the kitchen, where old Maria was still washing dishes from the evening meal. She looked up, saw their faces, saw the iron and hammer they carried, and made a choice. She turned back to her washing without saying a word. They climbed the servants' stairs to the second floor. The house smelled of tobacco and imported Portuguese wine. Oil paintings of Carvalho ancestors stared down from the walls with the same cold eyes that ran through the family line. The floorboards creaked under their weight. They were used to dirt floors, not polished wood. At the end of the hallway, Carvalho's door stood slightly ajar. A girl's quiet sobbing came from within, punctuated by the master's heavy breathing and slurred words. He was drunk. That would help. Elias pushed the door open slowly. The scene before him was exactly what he'd expected, and exactly what made his blood turn to fire in his veins. Caterina cowered in the corner, her dress torn, her face bruised. Carvalho stood by the window, his back to the door, fumbling with his belt. The master turned at the sound of footsteps, his pale face flushing with alcohol and anger. "What the devil? How dare you enter my private chambers? I'll have you both flayed alive." Elias raised the branding iron, its SC letters catching the lamplight. "You recognize this? You should. You used it on my mother 15 years ago. You used it on 6 other women before her. You were about to use it on Caterina." Carvalho's eyes widened, not with shame or remorse, but with outrage at being challenged. "You forget your place, slave. I own you. I own your body, your labor, everything you are." "You never owned this," Elias said, tapping his chest where his heart hammered. "And tonight you pay the debt you've owed for 15 years. The master lunged for the pistol on his nightstand, but Tomas was faster. The hammer caught Carvalho on the temple with a sickening crack. The master of Fazenda Santa Cruz crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, blood spreading across the expensive Persian carpet his grandfather had shipped from Lisbon. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but sometimes they need a push. What happens when the oppressed become the judges? Comment below if you think Elias made the right choice. Master Carvalho lay unconscious on the floor, breathing in shallow gasps. Blood matted his thinning hair where the hammer had struck, and his pale fingers twitched against the Persian carpet. For a moment, the 3 enslaved people stood frozen, Elias with the branding iron, Tomas with the hammer, and Caterina still pressed against the wall, her torn dress clutched to her chest. The magnitude of what they'd done settled over the room like ash after a fire. In the eyes of Brazilian law, they had just committed the ultimate crime. Not murder yet, Carvalho still lived, but assault against a master which carried the same brutal punishment. They would be hanged. In Salvador's public square, as an example, their bodies left to rot as a warning to anyone else who dared challenge the natural order of things. "We need to finish this," Elias said, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "If we stop now, we die for nothing. If we finish, at least we die having spoken truth." Caterina found her voice, raw and broken. "He told me I reminded him of someone from years ago, a woman named Rosa. He said he'd enjoyed her, and he would enjoy. Me too. He said it was his right. She looked at Elias with recognition dawning in her eyes. Rosa was your mother. Yes. The word came out like a prayer and a curse combined. Then finish it, she said. For her. For all of us he's destroyed. For every woman who will come after if he wakes up tomorrow. Tomas moved to the window, checking the yard below. The overseer's quarters are still dark, no one heard. But we don't have much time. Dawn comes at 5:30 and someone will bring his breakfast at 6. Elias knelt beside the unconscious master, studying the face that had haunted his nightmares for 15 years. In sleep or unconsciousness, Carvalho looked smaller, more pathetic, just a man, not the monster who'd loomed so large in Elias's memories, but the scars on his mother's body had been real. The river that swallowed her grief had been real. The tears Katerina cried tonight were real. "Help me carry him," Elias said to Tomas. "We're taking him to the forge." They wrapped Carvalho in a bedsheet to prevent blood from trailing through the house. The master was a slight man, but dead weight was always heavy. They struggled down the servants' stairs, through the kitchen where Maria still worked, her back deliberately turned to them, and out into the humid night air. The fazenda slept around them. In the senzala, 140 exhausted people dreamed whatever dreams enslaved people could manage. In the sugar mill, machinery stood silent, waiting for dawn to resume its grinding work. In the fields, sugarcane rustled in the breeze, coming off the Paraguaçu River, indifferent to human suffering. They laid Carvalho on the dirt floor of the forge. Elias stoked the fire, watching flames leap and dance, casting their orange glow across iron tools that had shaped this plantation's cruelty for decades. He placed the branding iron directly into the coals and watched it begin to glow, first red, then orange, then white-hot. Carvalho stirred, groaning. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, when his vision cleared enough to see Elias standing over him with the glowing iron. Understanding and fear finally registered on his face. "Please," the master whispered, "I'll free you, all of you. I'll write the papers right now, just let me live." "You had 15 years to free us," Elias said calmly. 15 years to show mercy. 15 years to see us as human beings instead of property. You chose violence every single time. I'll give you money. There's gold hidden in the house. Take it and run north. You can buy passage on a ship, start new lives in freedom bought with your blood money," Tomas interrupted. "Freedom that requires us to run and hide like criminals? No, tonight isn't about escape. Tonight is about justice." Elias pulled the branding iron from the fire, its SC letters glowing white-hot. "You marked my mother with this. You marked dozens of others, claiming them as your property, as if human beings could be owned. Like cattle. Tonight, you wear your own brand." "God will damn you for this," Carvalho shrieked, his composure finally shattering completely. "You'll burn in hell for God." Elias's laugh was bitter as medicine. "You priests blessed this plantation. Your God sanctioned slavery. Your Bible was used to tell us we deserved our chains. If there is a God, he's been watching your crimes for decades. Tonight, he's working through these hands." He pressed the branding iron against Carvalho's chest. Over his heart, the master's screams shattered the night air, a sound that would wake the entire plantation. The smell of burning flesh filled the forge, a smell Elias remembered from childhood when he'd hidden behind woodpiles and watched his mother suffer this same fate. But unlike his mother, who'd endured in silence to protect her son, Carvalho had no dignity in his pain. He thrashed and begged and screamed until his voice went hoarse. When Elias finally pulled the iron away, the SC brand was seared deep into the master's flesh, a permanent mark of ownership reversed. The screaming had done its work. Lights flickered on in the senzala. The overseer's door banged open. Voices called out in Portuguese and in the various African languages that still persisted despite attempts to crush them out. "They're coming," Tomas said, standing at the forge entrance. "Whatever we're going to do, we do it now." Elias looked at Carvalho, who whimpered on the ground, his chest still smoking. The master had passed out again from the pain, merciful unconsciousness that Rosa had never been granted. But Elias wasn't finished. The brand was just the beginning. The real message still needed to be delivered. He selected a long iron spike from the wall, the kind used to secure fence posts deep in the Brazilian earth. It was 3 feet long, pointed at one end, with a flat head for hammering at the other. He'd forged this very spike 2 months ago, never imagining its ultimate purpose. "The gate," Elias said. "We hang him on the fazenda gate so everyone who passes sees what happens when masters forget that enslaved people are still human, still capable of rage, still capable of justice." Tomas stared at the spike, understanding the full, brutal poetry of what Elias planned. "They'll hunt us. Every slave hunter in Bahia will be looking for us. I know, but we'll die as men who chose their own path. And maybe, just maybe, some master somewhere will think twice before raping his next victim. Maybe some mother will be spared what mine endured." Outside, the commotion grew louder. The overseer was shouting orders, organizing a search. They had minutes at most. Elias and Tomas lifted Carvalho's unconscious body one final time and carried him toward the main gate of Fazenda Santa Cruz, the gate every visitor passed through, the gate that bore the family crest, the gate that would now bear witness to a different kind of history. To keep this story from being silenced, leave a like now. The main gate of Fazenda Santa Cruz stood 12 feet tall, constructed from Brazilian hardwood and wrought iron that Elias himself had forged 2 years prior. The Carvalho family crest hung at its center, a sugarcane crossed with a sword, symbols of wealth built on violence. A full moon illuminated the scene as Elias and Tomas dragged their unconscious master toward this monument to his own power. Behind them, chaos erupted across the plantation. The overseer, a brutal Portuguese man named Silva, had organized a group of capatazes, the armed enforcers who kept order through fear. Their torches bobbed through the darkness like angry fireflies, converging on the forge where the screaming had originated. "We have 5 minutes, maybe less," Tomas panted as they propped Carvalho against the gate. The master was beginning to stir again, moaning through his pain. The brand on his chest had stopped smoking, but the flesh remained an angry red, the SC letters now a permanent testament to his crimes. Elias positioned the iron spike against Carvalho's abdomen, just below the ribcage. His hands were steady. 15 years of rage had crystallized into this single moment of absolute clarity. This wasn't murder driven by passion. It was execution driven by justice that the law refused to provide. "Wait." Katerina's voice came from behind them. She'd followed from the main house, her torn dress now covered by a shawl, her face set with determination that transcended her 16 years. In her hands, she carried a torch and something else, a leather-bound ledger from Carvalho's study. "What's that?" Elias asked. "His records. Every person he's ever purchased, sold, or killed, every woman he's violated, every child torn from their mother. It's all here, written in his own hand." She opened the ledger, revealing pages of names, ages, prices. Next to some names were notations. Resistant, disposed of. Breeding stock, productive. Damaged goods, reduced price. The 3 of them stared at the evidence of systematic dehumanization, rendered in neat Portuguese script and careful accounting. Carvalho had documented his own atrocities with the pride of a merchant tracking inventory. "Read it," Elias said. "Read the names while we finish this. Let them be witnesses." Katerina began reading by torchlight, her voice growing stronger with each name. "Rosa, purchased 1829, Salvador Market, 12 years old. Ama, purchased 1831, bearing child, 15 years old. Kofi, resistant, disciplined, died, 1833. Zara, disposed of after illness, 1835. The litany of suffering stretched back decades. Carvalho stirred at the sound of his crimes being spoken aloud, his eyes opening to see the three people standing over him with the spike and the ledger and the torch. "You're making a mistake," he rasped, trying once more to bargain. "Kill me, and they'll slaughter everyone on this plantation. Silva will burn the senzala with people inside. Is that what you want? The blood of 143 people on your hands?" It was a familiar weapon, collective punishment, the threat that made enslaved people police themselves and each other. Resist, and everyone suffers. Fight back, and the innocent pay the price. It was how the system maintained itself despite being outnumbered. But Elias had thought about this through long nights in the senzala. "No, the blood is on your hands, and on the hands of every master who built this system. We're just returning what you gave. And maybe, just maybe, when masters across Brazil hear what happened here, they'll remember that enslaved people can fight back, that we're not just property that accepts abuse forever." He raised the hammer, positioning the spike. Carvalho's eyes went wide with the understanding that his pleas had failed. "For Rosa," Elias said. "For Ama. For Kofi. For Zara. For every name in that ledger, and every name that was never recorded." The hammer fell. The spike drove through Carvalho's body and into the wooden gate behind him with 3 heavy blows. The master's scream cut short as the iron pierced vital organs. His body convulsed once, twice, then hung limply against the gate, suspended like a grotesque puppet. Blood ran down the wood, pooling in the dirt. The Carvalho family crest hung just above the dead master's head, an ironic halo for a man who'd ruled his kingdom with systematic cruelty. Tomas drove a second spike through Carvalho's shoulder, securing the body more firmly. "So he doesn't fall," he said grimly. "So everyone sees." Katerina placed the open ledger at the base of the gate, weighted down with stones. "So they know why," she added. "So this isn't just random violence, but documented justice." The 3 of them stepped back to look at their work. In the moonlight, the gate of Fazenda Santa Cruz had been transformed from a symbol of power into a message. Master Antonio Carvalho hung crucified on his own gate, branded with his own iron, impaled with spikes forged. In his own workshop, with his own records of atrocities spread below him. It was brutal, it was horrifying, it was a mirror held up to a brutal and horrifying system. Torches were getting closer now. Silva's voice barked orders. "Search every building. Find whoever did this. Bring them to me alive." "We need to run," Tomas said. "Now. The river is our best chance. If we can reach the mangroves—" "No." Elias's voice was calm. "Running means they hunt us like animals. Running means they say we're criminals who murdered a good master. We stay. We stand here and tell everyone what he did and why he died. They'll torture us," Katerina whispered. "They'll make examples of us in the worst ways possible." "I know. But if we run, this just becomes a story about violent slaves. If we stay and speak truth, some people will hear. Not everyone, not the authorities, but the other enslaved people across Bahia, across Brazil. They'll hear that someone fought back, that someone said, 'No more.'" Tomas considered this, then nodded slowly. "My daughter will hear the story. She'll know her father died standing up instead of kneeling down. That's worth something." The 3 of them sat on the ground before the gate, beneath the body of their dead master, and waited for what would come. Around them, the fazenda came fully awake. Enslaved people emerged from the senzala, rubbing sleep from their eyes, then freezing in shock at the scene before them. Some gasped, some covered their mouths, some smiled grimly. Silva arrived with 6 armed capatazes, their muskets loaded and ready. The overseer stopped dead at the sight of Carvalho's body hanging from the gate, his face cycling through shock, horror, and rage. "Seize them!" he roared. "Seize the murderers!" The capatazes rushed forward, but Elias didn't resist, neither did Tomas or Katerina. They allowed themselves to be grabbed, their hands bound with rope, their bodies thrown to the ground and kicked for good measure. Silva walked slowly to the gate, staring up at his dead master. He saw the brand, he saw the spike, he saw the ledger. For just a moment, his face registered something complex, not sympathy, but recognition. Silva had witnessed Carvalho's cruelties for a decade. He'd carried out many of them himself. "Do you know what you've done?" Silva asked quietly, looking down at Elias. "Do you understand the hell that's coming?" "I understand that hell was already here," Elias replied. "We just redistributed it." "Would you have done differently than Elias? Write it in one sentence." Dawn broke over Fazenda Santa Cruz on August 15th, 1847, revealing a scene that would be whispered about in slave quarters across Brazil for generations. Master Antonio Carvalho's body still hung from the gate, now surrounded by curious enslaved people who'd been summoned to witness what rebellion looked like. The authorities had been sent for, but Salvador was 10 miles away, and news traveled slowly in those days. Elias, Tomas, and Catarina knelt in the dirt with their hands bound, surrounded by armed capatazes. Silva had kept them alive deliberately. Their punishment needed to be public, spectacular, a lesson that would crush any other thoughts of resistance. But in the hours between the killing and the arrival of authorities, something unexpected happened. The enslaved people of Fazenda Santa Cruz began to talk. Old Maria from the kitchen told the younger ones about Rosa, about the night 15 years ago, when a 13-year-old boy had hidden behind woodpiles and watched his mother's spirit break. A woman named Benedita shared her own story of being violated by Carvalho when she was 14, of the child she'd borne from that violence, a light-skinned boy who worked in the main house and called the master Sir, without knowing he was saying it to his own father. The stories multiplied like seeds finding soil. Woman after woman stepped forward with testimony that matched the names in Carvalho's ledger. The men shared stories of beatings, of friends worked to death, of families sold apart when Carvalho needed cash or wanted to punish someone. By the time the magistrate arrived from Salvador with a contingent of militia, over 100 voices had spoken. The capatazes had tried to silence them, but there were too many, and the truth had momentum now. Magistrate Fernando Costa was a practical man in his 50s who'd overseen countless cases involving enslaved people. He expected a simple proceeding: identify the murderers, confirm their guilt, schedule the execution. But when he saw the ledger spread at the base of the gate, his expression shifted. "This is Master Carvalho's handwriting?" he asked Silva. "Yes, senor, but that doesn't excuse—" "I'm not excusing anything. I'm establishing facts." Costa picked up the ledger, reading through pages of documented abuse. As a magistrate, he'd known abstractly that masters sometimes mistreated their property, but seeing it laid out in such methodical detail disturbed even his hardened sensibilities. He looked at Elias. "Did you kill your master?" "I executed a rapist and torturer," Elias replied. "A man who documented his own crimes in that book you're holding. A man who violated my mother, then watched her drown herself in the river from grief. A man who was preparing to do the same thing to that girl." He nodded toward Catarina. Costa studied the 3 kneeling figures. By law, his duty was clear: enslaved people who guildmasters must hang, no exceptions. The system couldn't tolerate any other outcome. But he'd also read enough of Carvalho's ledger to know that some of Brazil's laws were themselves crimes against humanity. "They'll be tried in Salvador," Costa announced. "Properly, with witnesses and evidence. Not here, not like this." Silva looked surprised. "The usual punishment for—" "I know the usual punishment, but this isn't a usual case. There will be a trial." That decision, small as it seemed, changed everything. A trial meant publicity. It meant newspapers in Salvador and Rio de Janeiro would report the details. It meant Carvalho's ledger would be entered as evidence, making his crimes part of the public record. The trial took place 3 weeks later in a Salvador courtroom packed with spectators, plantation owners nervous about the precedent, abolitionists hopeful for justice, journalists eager for a sensational story, and enslaved people who'd somehow managed to crowd into the A gallery, knowing they might witness history. The prosecutor argued that regardless of Carvalho's character, slaves who murdered masters threatened the entire social order. If this crime went unpunished with death, every plantation in Brazil would face revolt. But something unexpected happened. The defense attorney, a young idealist named Miguel Ferreira, who'd taken the case pro bono, didn't argue innocence. Instead, he argued justification. He read from Carvalho's ledger. He called witnesses who testified to decades of systematic rape, torture, and murder. He pointed out that Brazilian law recognized crimes of passion, that it allowed for reduced sentences when victims acted under extreme provocation. These three people, Ferreira argued, lived every day under conditions that would drive any free person to violence. They watched their loved ones destroyed systematically. They had no recourse to law, no protection from authorities, no hope of justice through any legitimate channel. And, when faced with another imminent rape, they acted to stop it. If we execute them for protecting themselves when no one else would, we declare that enslaved people are meant to accept any abuse, any violation, any horror their masters invent. Is that really the Brazil we want to be? The courtroom erupted in argument. Plantation owners shouted that Ferreira was inciting rebellion. Abolitionists cheered that finally someone had spoken truth. The judge, an elderly man named Santos, called for order and recessed the trial for 3 days while he considered the verdict. Those 3 days saw riots in the streets of Salvador. Enslaved people on nearby plantations began refusing work, demanding better treatment. Masters across Bahia armed themselves, expecting uprising. The case had touched something deeper than anyone anticipated. It had forced Brazil to confront the violence at the foundation of its prosperity. When court reconvened, Judge Santos delivered a verdict that satisfied no one completely. The defendants are guilty of murder, he announced. However, given the extraordinary circumstances and documented provocation, the sentence is not death, but exile. They will be transported to Maranhão and sold to different masters far from Bahia. This court cannot condone killing of masters, but neither can it ignore the systematic abuse documented in evidence. It was a compromise, punishment enough to preserve order, mercy enough to acknowledge truth. Elias, Tomás, and Catarina were separated and sent to different corners of Brazil, never to see each other again, but the story didn't end there. Carvalho's ledger was copied by journalists and abolitionists. Excerpts appeared in newspapers across Brazil and eventually reached Europe, where the anti-slavery movement used it as evidence of the system's inherent brutality. The image of the master hanging from his own gate became a symbol, not celebrated publicly, but whispered about in senzalas across the empire. 15 years later, in 1862, Tomás's daughter Isabel was freed as part of a gradual emancipation law. She was 24 years old, and she named her first son Tomás after the father who died in Maranhão a decade earlier. She told her children the story of what happened at Fazenda Santa Cruz, ensuring the memory survived. 23 years after that night, in 1888, Brazil finally abolished slavery, the last nation in the Western Hemisphere to do so. The abolition didn't come from kindness or enlightenment alone. It came because people like Elias, Tomás, and Catarina had refused to accept their dehumanization, because they'd made the cost of maintaining slavery visible and undeniable. Fazenda Santa Cruz never recovered from the scandal. The Carvalho family sold it within a year, and it changed hands 3 more times before being abandoned. Today, the ruins of the main house still stand in the Bahia countryside, slowly being reclaimed by the Atlantic forest. The gate is long gone, rotted away by time and termites. But in communities descended from enslaved people, the story persists. It's told to children as a reminder that their ancestors were not passive victims, but active resistors, that they fought back in whatever ways they could, even knowing the cost. Elias died in Maranhão in 1859, still enslaved. his back scarred from fresh whippings his new master had given him for being difficult. But before he died, he told his story to the younger enslaved people around him, planting seeds that would grow in soil he'd never see. The iron spike that killed Antonio Carvalho was melted down by authorities, its metal recycled into something mundane, perhaps a horseshoe or a plow blade. But you can't really destroy what it represented. Justice delayed is not justice denied if people keep demanding it, keep fighting for it, keep refusing to accept that cruelty is the natural order of things. This story is brutal because the history was brutal. It's uncomfortable because the truth is uncomfortable. But it's necessary because we need to remember that freedom is never given. It's taken, often at terrible cost, by people who decide that dying on their feet is better than living on their knees. The scars of slavery still mark Brazil today, generations later. But so does the resistance, so does the courage of people whose names were never recorded in any ledger, who fought back in ways large and small, who refused to let their humanity be completely crushed. Elias kept his promise to his mother. He broke the cycle. And in doing so, he became part of a larger story, one that's still being written, still being fought, still demanding that we recognize the humanity in everyone, no matter what the law says, no matter what systems of power insist. That's the echo that still resonates, not the violence itself, but what it represented, the unbreakable human spirit, the refusal to be property, the insistence that justice matters even when the law disagrees. Some stories need to be told, even when they're hard to hear, especially when they're hard to hear. This is why history matters, not just the dates and names, but the human stories of resistance and courage that shaped our world. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. There are more voices from the past that deserve to be heard, and you'll want to be here when we tell them. What other untold stories of resistance should we explore? Drop your suggestions in the comments.